This is the Slots and Sockets Podcast, episode number 54. I am one of your hosts, the freshly shorn IRD Moose, and my partner in crime,
Red Penguin.
Red Penguin. Team Red.
Team Red. All red.
Very, very red, yes. So, I've been doing some shopping for parts. In fact, just before we started recording, I managed to snap up a 9800 X3D, which seems like it's been pulling hen's teeth to get my hands on one. And the process today and, over some of your hardware buying experiences kind of led me to want to talk about just how much the market sucks right now. I mean, we're looking at 5090s going for upwards of $4,000. We're looking at no stock on the 9070s and the 9070 XTs. It's just a mess.
It is.
That is the most pregnant of pregnant pauses I've ever seen.
Well, I was waiting because they did the stock alert for the 9070 XT.
Oh, yeah. You were waiting for like the perfectly timed. It's in
I'm
stock
waiting.
now.
I'm waiting to see if you're like, I'm gonna go do it.
Okay, so I actually have it muted so because it'll distract me because ADD. But, full transparency, yeah, we actually did start recording the show, and Turbo noticed that B&H Photo had a 9800 X3D come into stock, and so we stopped recording and restarted to so that I could order it. But so I don't have the part in hand. But the market has been tough. Because if you're trying to build a new PC, or you're trying to upgrade, or think of this scenario, your computer blows up on you. Your graphics card, your CPU, your board, whatever, just goes completely dead. What are you going to do? You're stuck.
It's really interesting. I talked, obviously if we and you have talked about your desire for an upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
I've got people who have desires to get 50 series stuff. I was talking to a friend of mine, and like for instance, in his situation, it's really interesting because he was running into problems where he was stuttering in Path of Exile 2. Mm-hmm. And come to find out, we talk about it and come to find out that PoE 2 is a highly CPU restrictive game. And right. What was happening was his processor wasn't able to keep up with the game. And so he was like, look, I've had this thing for like 5 years. I'm ready for an upgrade. And we were talking, I'm like, now's the worst time for an upgrade.
Yeah.
And we were looking at different things, and we found a couple of like systems, but the problem is like I told him, I said, you could come to me and we could build a system. I said, but it's dependent about what's in stock when you get here. Mm-hmm. Right now, at my local micro centers, the best thing you're going to do in a budget is a 7900 XT at $700. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not a bad card, and it's not a horrible price. Like, if you didn't have the new 9000 series.
Right.
And I'm like, and I said, but the 9000 series legitimately is an upgrade here. It really is. Yep. And I said, it would be a disservice for me to tell you anything other than that. And so, we were looking, and then we were looking at different, like a pre-built system, because he's like, well, maybe I'll just go that route. And we found some decent options, but it's frustrating because MSRP means nothing now.
Yeah.
It's useless. In fact, Asus has discontinued their base model cards pretty much across the board. PNY has done the same.
Yep.
And a lot of others have taken their MSRP models, if they still make them, and jacked them up $130, $140.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just hurts when you realize that were you lucky enough to get this on release date, that was a $599 card, and now they want to charge $730 for it. But
Yep.
unfortunately, this is the problem you're going to run into when you want to buy something, and if you're not ready, or the downside for somebody, if their system just kind of goes kaploop, that's the thing that sucks, because what's happening is that the new parts are just like bad expensive. And then the other half of it is because of that, the used market is really high too. If you're sitting, like, for gamers, if you're sitting on a bunch of old graphics cards, like if you weren't somebody that sold your graphics cards and it just kind of sat on a shelf, and you've got a shelf of GPUs specifically, dude, making bank. You can afford to trade all those bad boys in and make some bucks, because like some of these older cards, a generation or two, are really selling really well. Like, for instance, a 4070, if you look at how much those are selling on Amazon, the non TI version was still selling upwards of over $600. And in all honesty, the 4070 and the 5070 are, in my opinion, just not good value cards. They are going to age horribly.
Yep.
Because of the VRAM. But that's what's going on. This is, and I think there's really a lot of panic buying right now. I think there's been panic buying. I mean, let's be honest. My upgrade last November to a 9800 X3D, that was absolutely a panic buy because of tariffs. I was worried that tariffs were going to jack up the price.
Sure.
Now, luckily, you got your processor the same as mine, for the same price that I paid, plus or minus tax. I don't know if it was more or less, but but
next day shipping, it was so it'll be here day after tomorrow. It was like $530.
Yeah, that's so you probably
said
the same price, because I paid like $515 for mine.
Yeah,
but
I paid extra for quicker shipping.
Yeah, I mean, but that's it. Like, the question is like at $479, which is MSRP for the 9800 X3D, if you increase that by 15% or more or less, like, what is that? That just makes overall gaming that much more expensive and harder and out of reach for the vast majority of people.
Yep.
There's a couple of interesting things from the GPU side. We do see a lot less interest in some of these cards as you go higher in the stack. Like, for instance, the Asus 5090 Astral liquid cooler.
Yeah.
And this is what this is. I don't know where, but someone along those lines is making a crap ton of money. I do not believe it's the retailer. I'm going to leave the name out of it. But retailer 10 days ago had that card listed MSRP at $2,800 before tax and shipping. That same retailer this last week was selling them for $3,800.
Yikes.
$900 bump. Now, I don't know if this is Asus, because Asus has increased prices. I don't know if this is a middleman. I don't know if it's the retailer, but someone along the lines is adding $900 and making some money.
Yeah. Yeah, and
the positive thing is it didn't sell out. The downside, well, hold up, let me rephrase that. It didn't sell out instantly.
Right.
It eventually sold out. Yeah. So that's the thing, is like within a day, they had maybe 10, 15. By the end of the day, they were down to like 3 or 4. And then within the next day, they were gone. So,
yeah, I mean, the best thing we can do is
like,
leave
you're not
these cards
getting
on
to
the
the point
shelf.
where they don't sell. Now, from my understanding is that in Europe, the prices are so outrageous that you can find stock, but they're stupid expensive.
Right. Now, the interesting thing is they don't necessarily have the tariffs to deal with that we do. So why? Why are they so expensive? Is it just
I
the
believe, I don't know
freight?
what the difference is, and I don't know if it's laws. I think part of it is that it's just like how their market works, is that everyone makes a fair share of what they think they should be making on those. Um, I don't know. I do not know, but I do know that in Europe, graphics cards are wildly more expensive. Now, maybe they do. I don't know if, and I don't know enough about the economics of that, if Europe or EU have additional taxes or tariffs. But you know, that's it.
Yeah.
Like that's just the cost of what we're seeing, and the downside to this. And I do believe that there's some relief coming, albeit some different ways to look at relief. Okay. Um, I if tariffs hit and we see a 25% bump in video cards and pricing, that's gonna hurt.
Yep.
That is and it's gonna hurt everybody because there's no way around it. Two, I think the other concern I have with a lot of this is there will come a point when people are just not willing to buy it at that price.
Right.
I think that right now there's enough, like there's a lot of demand,
Yep.
but I also believe that a lot of retailers aren't doing a lot to stop the scalping. And I would make an argument that a number of retailers benefit from scalping and have zero issues with letting these go to scalpers, because every time they sell it to a scalper, they make another sale.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, some of these retailers get the scalped sale and then they get the resale from the
Yeah, the
scalper.
resale on it.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's if anything, it benefits them more to sell to scalpers, even if it hurts their reputation with customers. And you
To be
know,
honest, I don't think most consumers care. I know it. They
yeah,
all compete about it, but I don't think that they look at Amazon, or I don't know. That's a good question. The loaded question I would say there is, from a consumer's perspective, I wonder how people do view that. I don't know, but what I will say is that for an XFX 9070 XT, the cheapest model I think I've seen is $850, and that's absolutely pathetic.
yeah,
Someone in there is making some serious money on that card,
yeah,
absolutely serious money.
yeah.
Um, but that's the going rate, and unfortunately, cards. And what's interesting is that like, and both sides, like there are AIBs that are more sensible, and I don't know where if it's AIBs pushing this price up or what, but it's there are some AIBs that seem to be a little bit more sensible in their pricing than others. Asus has by far been the most expensive across the board on the NVIDIA side.
Yeah.
Um,
XFX
if
seems
you
to be
can,
filling that role on the AMD side.
yeah, XFX for sure.
For the
And
Swift, they're asking 849, which is ridiculous.
that's the entry level card.
The Swift is the
Um,
base model. That should be 749.
my experience with the XFX card was not good.
Mm.
In
How
fact,
so?
I would go to the say of the cards, the Gigabyte, the power color,
Power color. Yeah.
power color, and the Gigabyte. XFX was playing for third place,
Right.
and it was arguable between two cards.
And the one you had was the Mercury, right? That was their top end model?
That was the Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
It was an OC1, not a Max OC card.
Mm.
But I'll make the argument it did not OC very well.
So either it was
Surprisingly,
just Silicon Lottery or
It may be. Um, but by far the cheapest card of the bunch was the fastest.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, the best. Of those cards, the Gigabyte was the best.
Yeah, and that's
And
that's kind
Gigabyte's
of the
been the
card.
most price reasonable
Yep.
on the AMD side. And surprisingly, Asus on the AMD side has been surprisingly um, resilient in their pricing. Their pricing on the Asus side has been really good on the AMD side.
Hmm.
It's just that you don't see a lot of those. They don't come a lot in stock, and I don't know if it's just they're not getting a lot, but yeah, really, really interesting. Really
Yeah,
interesting.
and I think one of my frustrations happened to me this morning was I was tooling around Amazon, kind of starting to build out my order for the parts. Um, and they had listed the 9800X3D for $399. And while I was building out the cart, it just disappeared. And then I go back to the page for the 399 model, and the page just throws a 404. So I don't know if they goofed up the product page or what, but I went back and then tried to add the 479 version, which is, the price you paid back in November and what seems to be the actual MSRP, and it wouldn't let me because then they were out of stock. So I wonder if maybe they had some kind of weird flash sale, or, well, it is April 1st, so they might have been trying to play a poorly executed April Fool's joke. Um, but I very much would prefer a 9950X3D, but I'm kind of at the point where my 5800X is long enough in the tooth that it's kind of time to upgrade, and that's that's where I'm going to go. Is I'm going to go with the 9800X3D for now, and if I get a screaming deal on a 9950 or maybe a 10950 or something like that down the line that's X3D, I'll go there. Drop it in the board
Yeah.
and rock and roll.
You know, now let's talk about some things real quick of things that I think would be positive for the PC market
Hmm.
because there's some good things that are coming out um, that I realistically think can have a positive impact
Sure.
on gaming. So obviously supply. Um, I think that supply will absolutely kind of move us up in the positive direction.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is I do see some positive things with supply. It seems like we can start to see the market kind of normalize at least some bit where cards don't instantly sell out.
Right.
Where people kind of like even scalpers are like, it's not like there's not enough money there. And so like you see that with the 5080. And so you see 5080s in the $1,500 to $1,600 range, which is a 50%, 60% cost bump,
Hmm.
which I think is just crazy. But you start seeing where those cards will sit. Same with the 5090. So the market realizes that that is but I firmly believe that why it's so high is because scalpers buy them instantly.
Yeah.
Like I was in line at Micro Center looking for a 5090 for my brother. I was seventh in line of like 35. And they had two 5090s that came in overnight. Two. So obviously I didn't get one.
Right.
Now what we rephrase that? They had a 5090 Astral liquid cooled for $3,800, and that was not in the price point.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
And the other thing, so I really think that if retailers did more to get this in hands of gamers. I think that would be good. The other half I would say is AMD and Nvidia could do more on this. They could make a deal where they say, yes, but these have to be sold in store and you have to have certain requirements to buy these.
Right.
The other half of what they could also do is they could do something like, what Nvidia is doing or Zotac is doing and feeding it into verified gamers. I believe that's probably a positive thing. I think most people believe that. The other piece I would say is I believe that Nvidia and AMD pushing more cards from their own stores and selling a reference card, Founders Edition, whatever you want to call it, is a positive thing. I also realize that there's relationships with the AIBs that they have to keep in mind. And look, at the end of the day, we do want the AIBs to be there. We want a solid network of card distributors. But if it keeps going like this, the question that's going to come back to is, are the AIBs ruining the image if they're going to do a 50-60% price bump over what it is?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I believe AMD and Nvidia, may look at this and say, look, this isn't working. When we set an MSRP and you're making 60% more than you should, someone in this line is making a ton of money. And I get it, but I also don't get it.
Right.
AIBs are hurting. I get it because if you can't get chips from Nvidia and they're the biggest piece, but if you can't get enough chips, you can't make enough cards. And we know that people are being laid off on that side of things.
Yeah. Well, you have to have entire manufacturing lines down when there's no chip to put on the card.
That's it.
You can make so many cards, but you can only do that for so long as you don't have chips to put on them.
Yeah.
And, it just kind of cascades through the whole industry because, you have NVIDIA that generated all this huge demand and hype for this generation. Everybody's ready to buy a new card. And then, the world gets 5 5090s. And so, AMD's like, oh, we better stock up. And, AMD's used to being like 5-10% of the entire market. And basically overnight, NVIDIA made AMD the market. And so, the stock issues that AMD is having are largely, I think, because NVIDIA can't get chips to their AIBs. And, so it kind of has a cascading effect.
They're just taking the silicon and pushing it to data center.
I think
they're
you're right.
prioritizing it for sure.
Yeah. I think they have some fat orders from big companies like X and from Facebook and all these and Google probably that are doing all of these, huge intensive AI based, we're trying to change the world with AI and, more power to them. But at the end of the day, we just get the short end of the stick.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I think, obviously more GPUs in market. I think reference card helps. But the one thing I will say that I think could be a really a big change here is APUs. I really believe in a lot of respects that APUs will play a much bigger role in solving a lot of these problems, because I bet you if you went to gamers and said, hey, here's a minis form with a max 395 plus or whatever they're calling that silly thing, and this is a little desktop and it has 4070 performance with 16 cores, 32 threads, and 64 gigs of LPDDR4 or 5, right?
Yeah.
And you said, you could have a 4070 performance with 16 gigs of RAM, or 20 gigs of RAM or 24 gigs of RAM, and you can scale it however you need it.
Yep.
I bet you if you sit there and said $1,000, I bet you a lot of gamers would look at that and say, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, and
That's
I think I
perfect.
I think that's one of those parts that kind of hits the sweet spot of the mid-range where the majority of gamers, because if you look at it, the 4070 and the 5070 are the mid-range cards. They're the cards that if you look at the bell curve, the majority of people buy those and the 4060s and the 5060s. But, you know, way less people are going to get the 5080, the 5090, 4080, 4090. And so, you know, targeting that mid range with the APUs, I think is a brilliant idea because it opens you up to having that option of, okay, am I going to stay with 1080p gaming or do I really want to push 4K 120 hertz or even 240 hertz? Do I want to do the super fancy stuff? And also at the same time, competitive gamers could potentially leverage that for, their own systems where, you're getting the high frame rates out of just the little bread box. And that thing rocks and rolls. It pulls, max, 200 watts for the whole system. And, you know, you don't need much else. And, yeah, it's probably going to have a lot shorter lifespan than building a discrete system as far as gaming because you can't upgrade the GPU. But, you know, if it just hangs off the VESA mount off the back of your monitor, do you really care? Because in 3 years, when you probably replace it anyway, there's going to be something 5 times faster out because APUs are getting better very, very quickly. And, when it comes to systems for people like my mom, with these APUs being absolutely viable for day to day use for most people, I would say, the next system I get for mom or I put together for mom is going to be something like that because she doesn't need a 4000D. She doesn't need a full size ATX board. I mean, heck, for years we ran her on a Celeron and a mini ITX chassis, and that was good. And the only reason we upgraded was because the hardware just died. I mean, it was ECS, so what do you expect?
Mhm.
But we still got 10 years out of an ECS board from, fries on a dirt cheap sale. So, if you don't need all that horsepower, you can stretch the longevity of it significantly. And, for those of us that would use that horsepower, uh, it's kind of nice because those things would make decent land rigs too. Then all you gotta do is figure out a monitor solution. And there's a lot of great travel monitor options that just get powered off of USB-C. So, I mean, be nice for LAN parties.
Mhm.
And I don't think the desktop is going to die. I think it's going to end up getting relegated to tuner culture. I mean, it always has been tuner culture, but it's going to end up, I think, being a lot more niche going forward, where, you know, rather than being the rule, it's going to end up being the exception.
Yeah. This is I've said this before and I'll say it again. I do believe that the APUs are going to be a dramatic change in gaming,
Mm.
specifically and I'll even go a step further. Um, the one thing that's going to be really interesting is we are really close to just having a straight up confirmation that Steam OS is going to be a thing.
Yeah, it's like they're teasing us
Yeah, like
They're-
it's not even a surprise,
yeah.
right? Like so
Instead of being like, oh my gosh, it's a thing, we're going to be like, it's about freaking time.
yeah,
I mean, there have been a lot of efforts to extract SteamOS from the Steam Deck and get it running on normal desktop hardware. There have also been efforts to integrate desktop hardware directly into the Steam Deck. You can get a NVMe to buy for PCI Express bracket that lets you plug a standard desktop graphics card in, and all you got to do is provide the power to the GPU from a power supply, and you could run a 5090 as a GPU for your Steam Deck, and it'll work. Um, and it'll work great. So APUs have that horsepower. Why do you really need more?
yeah,
Because I mean, and that's the thing is like you don't. It's more. I want more. I want to
yeah,
get 1,000 frames per second in Counter Strike 2, or I want to play Fortnite at 4K, 120 hertz, 3D, or you know, like your brother, he wants to run dual 4K displays on his head-mounted display for VR.
yeah.
And that's where you're going to need the significant desktop hardware is if you're kind of pushing into those niche applications.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see, because the problem is, and what we're hearing even from the AMD side, and this is what's going to be really, really interesting to come. And this is where there's obviously is a leader, and everyone else isn't there. I will say AMD is set to just absolutely demolish everybody
Yeah.
in this
Intel,
market.
Nvidia. I mean, yeah.
Let's look at the competition on the APU side.
Where
Intel, pretty much with their new CEO, it's my
mhm.
understanding that we've heard the death of the of Battle Mage. If it's my understanding that discrete graphics cards with this new CEO are dead, gone.
Mm. I
Um,
yeah, it's
I the next
I've seen signs
so
of it.
I yeah, we don't know, but there's obviously some restructuring that's going on there,
Right.
and nobody and no program, no division is safe. First
Yeah.
and foremost.
Well, I mean,
Second,
in to look at Battle Mage and the discrete graphics partition of Intel in its own right, they've had two successive launches where they completely failed.
the only positive thing I would say is that you can see the progress that they've made in the architecture and the drivers and the
Yeah.
software and the hardware,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. But
I mean,
unfortunately,
they've
that's not going
absolutely
to translate to sales. And it's my understanding that all of the cards that they sold at the beginning um, were sold at a loss, and you
Mhm.
can't find MSRP cards because, in all honesty, it was never viable to be at that price point.
Right.
Um, so Nvidia is going to have a real problem because they don't have the CPU side. Now we know that Nvidia is working on ARM, but I'll make the argument that ARM, um, I don't know if ARM is going to be. Now, NVIDIA could put a bunch of money and get ARM for Windows working really well. But then the other thing is SteamOS is Linux, and Linux has not played well with ARM. Well, let me rephrase that. No one's put a lot of time and money into ARM on Linux.
I don't know
Um,
about that because I mean the
it's
Raspberry Pi is ARM, and most of the OSs it runs are Linux based.
but
For example,
SteamOS isn't.
SteamOS is it Debian? No, it's Arch.
No, but
It's
it's still
Arch based.
x86 and
Right.
x64. That's
Right.
what I'm getting
It's
at.
gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
So, you know, Nvidia's got some issues now. Could Nvidia? The thing is that Nvidia could buy whatever they wanted to, so Nvidia could go buy Intel, um, if they could get a regulatory approval. And I think
Yeah.
there's some people who would be okay with seeing that. Um, I don't know if there's a lot enough value in Intel for them to buy, other than they make CPUs and have licenses, but
They
I don't
own
know.
x86. I mean, it's
The other half is they have,
x86 is them.
anyways. But
But yeah.
there's some interesting opportunities for things that that Nvidia could do, but they don't have a product that's out that they have people working on. Now,
Yeah.
I believe they have projects going in for sure.
Sure.
Okay, I don't doubt that one bit.
But nothing they can put on the shelves in the next 6
Now,
months to a year.
in all honesty, if that market just gets kills it, and AMD moves so much of their production over into that,
Mhm.
um, that's a market that they would have most likely to themselves for a substantial amount of time. And the leaks that we're seeing on the APU side is, um, still looks like some of these APUs are going to still be RDNA 3.5, but
Mhm.
I believe that they haven't ruled out using RDNA 4 in some of these APUs. And if you can start getting some of this newer architecture, the other piece I would say is that this is where the UDNA is a really interesting thought, that
Mhm.
maybe they're leaving things at the RDNA 3.5 level because they want to just go straight into the UDNA for RDNA 5 and just bypass 4, because they want to have a central, you know there's benefits from having things
A
similar.
common core,
Yeah,
common architecture, yeah.
it'll be
And
interesting.
I
That's
can
the
see where that makes
market.
sense.
That's a market that in all honesty, I think gamers will absolutely gravitate towards, because
Yeah.
if you can give me an APU with that 4070 4760 Ti, like that not top of the line, but you can get me really good graphics
Mhm.
in a thermal package that has one chip, that needs only one fan, that you could put in a laptop or a mini PC, um is going to do wildly well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wildly well.
And to your point, I think your thought of the move to UDNA would make sense because UDNA combines RDNA and CDNA, and you're getting the AI benefits from CDNA. You're also getting a lot of the other ray tracing benefits and things like that because those cards are built to do AI and ray tracing for video production. And they work on doing it as close to real time as possible. So, I think having that in a common framework of a CPU, an APU that kind of combines all of that would also be a good way of them launching UDNA, especially if they can get it off the ground for the next series of CPUs. Because right now we're looking at the 295, uh, or the AI 295 is the current one. And so if your speculation, your supposition is correct, they could potentially launch UDNA with a 395 chip that blows the doors off of what they have now, which is already hugely impressive. And if they could do that, I could see them AMD taking over a huge swath of the market, at
Mm.
least in the mid range, especially if Nvidia can't ship parts. Because, are you going to go with, building a whole system and then waiting for Nvidia to ship you a GPU? Or are you going to get something right now that's an APU and you're done. You just have to install your chosen OS, whether it's Steam OS or Windows or, if you're really hating life, why not compile Arch Linux? What the heck?
Mhm.
And so, I think the other thing that would do is be a pretty big nail in the coffin for the console market, which seems like it's been dying this generation. Like, not a whole lot of people bought the PS5 Pro. Um,
That's not a huge
Everybody was pissed
surprise.
off
I
of
mean,
it.
in all honesty,
Yeah, but if you compare the PS4 Pro to the PS5 Pro, the PS4 Pro moved a bunch of units. And it, granted, it wasn't nearly as much as the standard edition parts, but I'm not gonna say, oh, the console market's dying, it's doom and gloom. I don't think that, because there will always be that console market for people who just want a box that all it does is play the games for their favorite console vendor. Um, but I think what we could potentially end up seeing is Steam Deck boxes that consoleize the Steam experience. And we know Valve has been doing that, or been trying to get something like that off the ground, because in 2009 they had the Steam box. Uh, back in 2016 they end of life the remote Steam Deck, or the remote Steam console client, where you got a Steam controller and a little brick that connected to your PC. I used to use that in my bedroom as a remote desktop device, because I just log into my computer from bed. Great. And it worked. It still works. Um, and there's a lot of things you could do with an APU like that opens up a whole lot of other market opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise potentially buy a PC. They would just go to a console and just be like, okay, yeah, I'm okay with tech that's 2-3 generations old and the graphics kind of suck, but compared to what you can get on PC, but I don't have to worry about upgrades. I don't have to worry about drivers and stuff like that. And if
mhm.
they can get that experience kind of wrapped into one with an APU running Steam OS, everything squared away and good to go, and all you got to do is turn it on and play games, I think it's going to move.
I think so. I absolutely do think so. Um, you know, I just it's interesting to kind of see where it's going to end up going from here.
Yeah.
Um, because obviously this is not a healthy economic market for gaming at all. Um,
Yeah, it really hasn't been for a while.
no, and it's not going to
And
get,
it's sad. Yeah,
if it
I
gets
don't think it's going to
worse
get better
than
soon.
this, if it gets worse than this is going to be really good for PlayStation. The other half, because we've all but heard that Xbox is going to turn into a software company, that I don't think there's a next gen console from them.
Yeah.
And
Well, see, and
um,
that's where an APU would make perfect sense. Microsoft sells a APU based box for your TV. It's good to go. I mean, the APUs now are orders
dude,
of
the
magnitude
cool
more
thing about
powerful.
this is, think if you put the APUs in a TV.
I okay, so I don't like that, and here's why.
I don't like it either, but I would I pay money? Would I pay another $200 for a TV that had an APU that had Steam OS on it, like
No,
in the TV?
I wouldn't. But I would
Maybe.
pay an extra $200 for a TV that had a slot in the back where you could slide an APU module into it. And
Yeah,
we
I mean,
already
I
have
like the
something like
ability
that.
to. Yeah, I mean, I like the ability to upgrade for
Yeah.
sure.
I I mean that's why, even though I've had smart TVs since 2011, I've exclusively used streaming boxes, because technology changes. The manufacturer abandons things constantly. My Samsung TV, which actually just died because mom's been using it for the last several years as a monitor. Um, my old Samsung TV, 2 years into owning it, stopped getting software updates from Samsung, and I could no longer get any of the applications to connect to Netflix, um, or Netflix or any of the other streaming services. And at that point, I didn't care because I'd already been using a Roku at that point. And so, I don't like things being integrated like that, but I like having the option to integrate them. So, yeah, a TV with a little slot in the side, which there's already a form factor for that. There's already infrastructure for that because Intel developed something several years ago that's largely used in consumer TVs, where you could basically slot an entire PC into a socket on a TV, and the TV just becomes the PC. Uh, and it's usually used for digital signage, but you could do anything a PC can do on it if you load the right OS. And so, having something like that for the home where it's a standardized, and that's the other thing, is it's a standardized socket, it's a standardized connector. Um, so, if we can standardize something like that for the home market, which, I mean, arguably we already have, with HDMI and with, all this other fancy stuff that exists. Uh, it would make things a lot simpler.
Yep.
So, well, I think on that bombshell, we're going to call it a show for this evening. Thank you all for watching, giving us a little bit of your time. And do remember to like and subscribe and drop some comments down the doobly-doo below if you got any ideas, if you guys have scored a deal on a 5090, or you have any thoughts on where the market is right now, where it might be going. Let us know. We love to hear your feedback. And until next time, have fun storming the castle.
Night, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.